Thanks so much for coming. I'm here to introduce David Chang, as you know, the chef of Momofuku, Ssam Bar Bakery and Milk Bar. And after the talk, we'll do a little Q&A. And then up in Hemispheres, if you were lucky enough to get a book, David will be signing books. All right? Thanks so much for coming. Here's David Chang.
Thanks. Morning, everyone. Very strange. Google last week, San Francisco, Google New York, and I never thought, again, cooking would lead me to both Google campuses. Very strange. Yeah, I got into cooking, and how I got here is very, very strange and surreal. I started to cook because I did very poorly in college because I spent most of my time with doing extracurricular activities and not enough time in the classroom, which is why Google would never ever hire me. It was a real struggle to figure out what I wanted to do after college, and cooking was one of the few things that I knew I enjoyed. And it was a one profession that my father, I could have chosen to be a garbage man. He would have been more pleased with the decision I made, because he spent his entire life, immigrating. He immigrated to this country and spent his entire life working 30 years in the restaurant industry, so I would never work in the restaurant industry. And it's ironic. And he sent me to the best schools he could and all that stuff, and I still wound up being a cook. And I wanted to see how far I could take it. That was it. It was one time. I mean, I've had a lot of discussions recently about, like, is there anything pure? Is there anything honest in terms of a craft anymore? And at that time, it was like 99. It was either .com or banking or whatnot. And I just felt that cooking was one of the few things that I thought was honest, that you could apply yourself and you could get better every day. And it was remarkable because you could use your hands, you could sort of act like a total buffoon, but still there's this total chaos, but it's under this umbrella of this sort of French system of a brigade. And I don't know, I felt like I found my calling, and then I could do this. And then, I was never the best cook in the kitchen. I worked for some great chefs, for Jean-Georges, Tom Colicchio, Danielle Blute, and Carmelini, and spent some time in Tokyo. But I got out of the game, and I say the game, I say fine dining game, because we normally associate great food with fine dining. And when I started cooking, and it wasn't, I can't say it's 20 years, it was really like 10 years ago, food, you had the Food Network, but food and cooking wasn't cool. Like, if any of you guys are thinking about career changing and going into cooking school, like, think twice. Because it's a hard business. It's not glamorous. And, TV has made it seem much more cooler than it actually is. Going back, I don't know if I'd actually be cooking in this world that is today's, like, food world, because it's just getting crazier and crazier. And I've had to, learn to deal with it. I got into cooking so I wouldn't have to speak in front of people. And here I am, speaking in front of all these people, and I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. So, I got out of, I've always sort of been a weirdly competitive person. I think it has to do, again, with golf. And this is before it was super cool to play golf. And I had the typical Asian father who was, like, trying to make me, pro. And then I realized that, I'll never forget, I was trying to qualify for this tournament. And all I did was play golf 365 days a year. I was trying to qualify for this tournament in Houston. And I was 11, and Tiger Woods was already on the brochure of the event. It was called the Big Eye in Houston, and he had already won it 2 years in a row, and that's when I knew. I was like, yeah, this guy's a lot better than I will ever be. So I think it slowly coincided with me just burning out on golf, but there's something interesting between golf and cooking, at least for me, because when you're playing golf, and I hate golf now, is that it's against you. It's just you and the golf course. And the only competition is the scoreboard and the playing and your competitors. So I'm always measuring myself against people. I wish I had that sort of competitive drive during school. That would have been great. But in cooking, you sort of see who's the best cook in the kitchen. This guy's a sous chef, and he got there from this point and this point. And I was very quick to realize that I was not naturally gifted as a cook, which is one of the things I loved about cooking. You don't have to be a superstar to become a good cook or a great chef. You just have to apply yourself. You have to be fully committed. And when I sort of learned that, I was learning this, and I had great mentors, and craft was very, very important to me. Because when craft opened up, we had Jonathan Beno, Marco Canora, Octar Noir, James Tracy, all these guys. People that won't never make it in the press. Like I have a friend, Mac Kern, he's a chef in Madrid in his own restaurant. Everyone that opened up that restaurant is a chef at their own restaurant now, which is very rare. And they all took me under their wing and beat the crap out of me. And that's how you learn. And I learned quickly, too, that these guys were better than me. So every kitchen I ever went to, I was always comparing myself to the best talent in the kitchen. And I would be like, well, there's no way I'm going to be better than this person. It's a really weird way of looking at things. But I'd learn as much as I could. And, someone asked me, I was like, what should I talk about? I have no idea. And I said, like, what about opening up the first restaurant? Well, I just got back from Japan. I think part of the reason I came back from Japan was my mom was battling cancer, and I was having a hard time working at Cafe Boulud and working for Andrew Carmelini, who's now the chef at Le Conde Verde, and he's probably one of the best chefs in America and supremely, supremely talented. I was also just working in that kitchen. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be as good as Andrew. Why am I cooking in fine dining? Why am I on the Upper East Side cooking for, an audience that I could care less about? I care about the food. So I want to have the challenge of fine dining. I want to have the pressure of fine dining, but why does this have to be in the environment of fine dining? Something I didn't really put together till just about now. So I left, and all these things started to happen. I had friends that passed away, and I was just in this weird spot where I was just like, I should be working at a new restaurant. And 2004 was one of the greatest years in New York City culinary history. You had Per Se open up, Masa opened up. A little bit later, you had Crew and Blue Hill Stone Barns, all tremendous restaurants. Hearth opened up. So it was a strange time for someone like myself who had been cooking 4.5, almost 5 years to be like, yeah, I'm going to open up a noodle bar. And everybody knew I was crazy about noodles. And I wanted to make ramen. And, I had a plan to go to Tokyo and learn how to make ramen, but instead I learned how to make all sorts of different things. And that plan sort of fell flat on its face, but it was a blessing in disguise. So the reason I opened up the noodle bar was I just needed to prove to myself that I could open up a restaurant. At the time, and I was just like, it was a challenge. It was something that I could sort of, if I could open up a 600 square foot spot on First Avenue on almost no budget, like $130,000, that was my only goal. The reason there's a minimalist and everything's plywood is not because we were trying to be artistic. We had no money, and those are the reasons why. It was about a test to myself, and that was the first and only goal I ever had from Momofuku, which is again why I pinch myself every day for everything that's ever happened, which is why I'm so hard on myself and our crew, because I feel very blessed to be in the position that we're in. So that restaurant opened up, and we failed, and continued to fail, and those are two of the things that became cornerstones of our restaurant, at least of our mantras. Like, if you're going to mess up big, or just fuck up, but own up to it. And number two was, be accountable for your actions. No excuses. And because no one's going to care. No one cares if we're going to go out of business. So, there were a lot of things going on, and we were going to go out of business after 6 months, 7 months. So again, right place, right time. We're learning how to run a business. I had a terrible business plan. I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't know how to run the cash register. The only one person that wanted to work with me is Joaquin Baca, and because all my friends at the time were working at these restaurants that were opening up. So I felt very, slighted, and things started to change, and one thing happened, and awards started happening. We became busier and busier, and the food really took a change right around springtime when the weather started, when the market came around, at the green market. And I think it tied in with the size of the space, which is what I'm trying to get back into, the mode of thinking and how we do things at the restaurant, and creatively speaking. And again, it's been a progression of accidents, and this is an accident. No, I didn't plan to have this sort of philosophy of how we create something. But the first Noodle Bar, which is now Co., and even Co. has these limitations, it's 600 square feet. It's the size of a one-car garage. Nobody in their right mind would open up a restaurant in 600 square feet. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. But that's one of the beautiful things when you're young and dumb. You don't know. And I told myself, well, if I go out of business, I have the rest of my life to get out of bankruptcy. I don't have a kid to feed. I don't have a wife to take care of. Let's go all in. Fuck it. So that's how we always get to this point of like, our backs are against the wall, and that's when sort of the adrenaline starts pumping and we start to make very bold decisions. It becomes more difficult when you become a larger organization. But, Noodle Bar, 600 square feet, originally very limited menu, about 5 food items, mise en place. Our mise en place in French means like basically the stuff you prep out in a kitchen. Wasn't more than 10 or 12 items. So it'd be like scallions, bamboo shoots, pork shoulder, pork butt. And when you only have so many ingredients, like 5 things to work with, after a while you just look at the same ingredients day after day, and you're just like, you're not really thinking. And then all of a sudden, things started to click. Be like, oh, what if we added? It was almost like a Rubik's Cube. If we just change this with this, then we have a new dish. And then we kept on evolving every day, changing and changing. And then we created a foundation in terms of what we wanted as a flavor profile. Then the green market happened. And then asparagus and ramps started to come into the restaurant, which are the first signs of spring. Ramps are such a cliche in New York, but you know what? Every spring I get excited because it's the first thing, and they're so damn tasty. And it's the one thing that we have over the West Coast. We have ramps. And, so that added a new variable, and food started to change, and you become very, very, we were forced to be creative because we had no other option. necessity is the mother of all invention, they say. And you really feel it when your accountant's like, you're going to go out of business in a month unless you change certain things. And you didn't want to let people down. And for like the first 6 months, and I remember reporters or whatever journalists would ask me like where I worked, I wouldn't tell them before, because I didn't want to embarrass the people that I work for. I didn't want to embarrass Marco Canora. I didn't want to embarrass Tom Colicchio. I didn't want to embarrass Jonathan Beno. So I just told them, please don't mention where I worked. And then all of a sudden, it just became a life of its own. And that's how Noodle Bar started. Nobody wanted to work with us. And then that really defined and paved the way and created the foundation for how we did things in the future, which is basically make mistakes, grow organically. I say the new Noodle Bar now, I always tell them if we serve fish and chips, or like recently, I think we just served tamales last night. And if we say we become a tamale restaurant, and that's all we serve in 2 years, I'll be very happy, because it means that we took this weird organic twist and turn, and how come Momofuku Noodle Bar is only serving tamales? It's weird, right? But I would be very excited, because that means everybody was involved in this process, and then it evolved every day, and we didn't have this sort of game plan that you had to do this, you had to do that. We didn't have a mission statement, So that's been very difficult to sort of keep this creative process of limiting your colors. And I found that a lot of the chefs that I admire around the world, probably number one right now is this guy, René Redzepi in Noma in Copenhagen. He's worked at LBE, he's worked at French Laundry, he's incredibly young. His restaurant's ranked 3rd in the world from Restaurant Magazine, and it deserves to be so. So if you're ever in Copenhagen, check out Noma. It's really, really amazing. But he's pretty much set off what he can cook with in terms of like a 100-kilometer radius. And it's really interesting, because this guy can cook anything he wants to. Excuse me. And it dawned on me how smart it was. In the spring and summertime, he's preparing for the wintertime. He has the ability to use, to cook with, I could use a crayon box, 128 or whatever they come in. He's chosen to really just cook with 5 colors. And it's really amazing to see somebody push the culinary envelope with the most basic of things. And there's some real genius behind that. And when you put a ceiling on yourself, I find that that's when our best dishes come about. When, right now we're opening up a place in Midtown. And a lot of times when we are, and this is another example, the chef that's going to be there, I'm not going to be the chef. I'm learning to, delegate it. Tinho is going to be the executive chef. We've been experiencing problems because we took over the space because the kitchen in Midtown, a place called Ma Pesh, which hopefully is going to open soon, is huge. It's enormous. I've never seen a kitchen this size. I mean, our places are tiny. This place is, we fight for storage. This place, we can store stuff anywhere. And New York storage is at a premium. It took a while, and again, it happened at Noodle Bar too. When we moved Noodle Bar, and when we went to Ma Pesh, we had a kitchen that had every toy possible. And we just fucked it up because we didn't know what to do. We got lazy. You get lazy when you have all these perks, when you have a full range, you have all this equipment that works. When you have nothing, you're just a little bit hungrier than the person that has everything. And that's something that has really influenced our cooking, and is probably one of the sort of guiding principles in the restaurant that I'm trying to make sure that everyone understands. Like the hungriest guy in the room, the guy with nothing to lose, is the most dangerous person. And that's the type of attitude we want. And you don't have to be the best cook in the world, but we want people with a high level of integrity that are willing to just do whatever it takes. And it's much more difficult to find these days. So it's weird. The creative process of cooking and making dishes, it's less about being in it and more about sort of being in the editing role. Somebody told me this way back when, and I was like, I'm never going to get to that point. And if I do get to that point, I wouldn't want to be that guy. I'm that guy now. And, I want to get back into the kitchen. I keep on saying things like that. But now it's a big organism. There was one person, then there was two people. Now we have over 300 employees. So I have to decide what's best for not just myself, but for everyone. Could I spend all my time in the kitchen just doing R&D? Yes, I'd love to do that. Do I want to speak to the public all the time? Not particularly. Do I want to do a book tour? Not really, but if I'll do whatever it takes for the greater good of the restaurant. And so there are younger cooks out there. And that's one of the things I realized, if someone's better at something, instead of trying to be, very competitive about it, I'm just going to be like, well, you are better at it. Maybe I can learn something, run with it. And that's what we try to do at our restaurants now. So the book we wrote with Peter, who is running to get markers, or maybe he's back, but Meehan was working at the New York Times, and I had no idea that that's another story, but we capture basically from day one of opening Noodle Bar in 2004 to March 2008. Regrettably, we don't have Milk Bar because we needed to get the book into the publisher. And Christina Tosi is going to work on her own book, which is great. But it also documented, like the menu at Co. That's in the book, it's totally different now. We're changing, we're constantly changing. And that's what I sort of tell people at our restaurants that are making the menus, that are cooking the food. People, we're overhyped. It's on every blog. I know it. I hate it. I hate the fact that people come in expecting to have a really good meal. We want them to have a great meal, but that's the challenge that is on us now. It's like, well, we have to live up to the hype, and there's no better feeling than proving someone wrong. At least for me, it's so when people enter our doors, whether it be Noodle Bar Co. or Ssam Bar or Milk Bar, being like, they want to come in hating this place. I think we all know what this is like, whether it's a football team, a band, author, or whatever, something that gets hyped up so much where you're like, it's almost like human nature now. You just want to hate it. It's our goal to make you feel wrong, to make you feel that you leave the place being like, I'm glad I spent my money there. That was worth everything that people have been talking about. And that's one of the things too. So, out of that first restaurant came a lot of the core principles from how we run our business today. And, it was probably one of the most important things is, I'm never happy with the status quo. If you're just meeting expectations, you're failing. And I want us to constantly be changing, which is why, if Noodle Bar turned into a tamale shop, I'd be very happy. That means we're tinkering every day. We're messing around with something. It's been a crazy trip. And the reason we wrote the book, quite honestly, besides publishers asking us, was I always have this fear that everything's going to fall apart. Everything is going to end. And I really thought at the time we were writing the book that we wouldn't be around in a month or a year. Because there's so many variables, there's so many things going on, and the economy was bad. I was just like, well, this has been such a crazy ride. We might as well document this. So that's why the book is written the way it is. And I think Peter Meehan did a great job, and we had an amazing photographer in Gabrielle Stavile, which was impossible. Imagine going to a Clarkson Potter division of Random House, known for doing Martha Stewart cookbooks and Food Network cookbooks, and we'd tell them, they gave us a list of photographers they wanted to use, and we gave them our list, which was one. And he's never shot food before in his life, but he's a photojournalist that had done stories of war, poverty, and famine. His portfolio wasn't necessarily the thing that cookbook publishers go giddy over, but I think Gabriele did a great job, and it's a real testament to him and everyone and the entire crew. So if you like the book, it's because of the people that were behind it and the team effort. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the team that are cooking at the restaurants right now. So I'm incredibly lucky to be here and to be talking to y'all. This is very, again, surreal. This whole thing is very surreal. So enough of me rambling on. I think we'll go to Q&A. Don't give me tough questions. Your colleagues on the West Coast gave me tough questions.
I have one for you. I was curious, there was this point you said when you were about to go out of business, right? And you had a month of budget left, right? I'm curious, like, what made the switch from the failure that you felt you had for 6 months, and then the success that kept you going after that, or in that month time when you were just about to fail. Like, what was the switch? Was it was it just the constant hard work you poured into it in the 6 month, and it was kind of just like a slow accumulation to some sort of crescendo, or was it, I don't know, was it, do you think, a stroke of luck that kept you going that month, or was it some like act of desperation you managed to like pull out of thin air, that you said when you were backed into the corner? Like, what was that?
Literally pulled it out of our ass. That's what I say. I think it's all of the above. And it was the right timing, right place, right time. Our restaurant, right place, right time. When we opened up our stuff 10 years ago, we wouldn't be here. It was all those things. It was an act of desperation. It was the right timing. It was the season. I think one of the big factors in that change that happened for the better was we started to learn how to run the business. I didn't have to ask questions about the cash register. We learned that we were an all cash business for the first 6 months, and then we're like, wait a second, we should take credit cards. So, little things that you don't think about, because like credit cards, people are going to spend more money, and for whatever reason, there's only a handful of institutions that are all cash businesses, and they do well at it because people know beforehand, I have to go into this restaurant with a huge wad of cash, like Luger's, or I'm screwed. Nobody knew who the hell we were, and we expected them to pay cash, so people would be like, you don't take credit cards? So that was little things like that. So it would be like 100 little things like that we really did not know how to run a business. I'm not joking. And it was like, oh yeah, we take credit cards. And all of a sudden, booze sales went up, and people were buying more food, and we weren't messing up the drawer at the end of the night because everything was all computerized and nice. So, but the dream of opening up that restaurant was to keep it simple, like a mom and pop store. And bless you. And in a mom and pop store, I guess you can do that, but we were understaffed, and we finally. And another reason why is we started to get help. People started to work for us. We had a very high turnover rate the first year. So, yeah.
Hi. Thanks for coming. I live down the block from Ssam Bar and Milk and Honey, so thanks for the extra 5 pounds. And noticed recently at Ssam Bar that there's been like a lot more cocktails on the menu,
Right.
and they're really good. Is that an area that you guys are thinking about expanding? Have you ever thought about going into the bar business?
Yeah, I think about going to the bar business all the time. I think that's if you talk to most cooks, and you ask them, like, what do you want to open up? They'll tell you a pub or a bar or a sandwich shop, something that's just like, very easy. Not that it's easy. That's the problem. Nothing's easy. We had a liquor permit, and we got a hard liquor license finally. And again, it just sort of happened. My friend Don Kim, who worked at PDT, was available, and we're like, let's go, you know. And you know, he's very talented, and I was just like, we sort of create the, you know, how big the sandbox is, and you can do whatever it is as long as you don't play outside that sandbox, then you won't get in trouble. So we have that cocktail program, and it's working. So yeah, opening up a bar would be a lot of fun. Bars make money, restaurants don't.
Hi, I also live like right across the street from Ssam Bar, so thanks. It's delicious. Can you talk just for as long as you want about how you make like pork buns so good, and how do you make the pork so soft, and then the fat tastes good, and like the bun part is amazing. It's just the whole thing is amazing.
Well, one of the things, we'll talk about pork, and you know, everyone's like, oh, you became this pork guy. Well, no, we opened a ramen shop, and ramen is pork based, and it wasn't my intention to be this, you know, have all this pork. But pork, for a lot of people, has traditionally been commodity raised, not pork, in confinement, and you know, the other white meat. Pork's not supposed to be white meat. It's not at all. So it's I liken it to drinking Tang versus freshly squeezed orange juice. It's that much of a difference. So if anything, if our pork buns are delicious, it's because of the pork we're using, and all we're doing is cooking it very slowly, slow roast. And you know, you could put that same pork in between some, you know, Wonder Bread, and you'll have a tasty sandwich itself. So I think a lot of it has to do with the product that we're using.
Hi, I too live in the neighborhood. I live between the Noodle Bar and the Ssam Bar, so it's like a wonderful choice. My question's about the huge, awesome photo of the band that you have. What's up with that? It's like the first thing I noticed when I walked into the Noodle Bar. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was yeah, it's very large. And the Noodle Bar, we have this big photo of the band it's on the inside cover of the Big Pink from the band. They used to tour with Dylan. If you're not familiar with them, one of my favorite bands of all time. And for whatever reason, I was like, I love that photo. I'm going to find a way to get that. And yeah, I'm not concerned with the interior or anything else or all these other things going on, but I was like, we have to get this photo. So if you notice in all these restaurants, we have a big John McEnroe at Ssam Bar. Totally random.
Do you love John McEnroe?
I do love John McEnroe. But besides that, it's just totally random, and it's funny. And I mean, you go to restaurants and you see pictures, you know, that are totally, I think, random and then arbitrary too. Like, great, you have a picture of an apple on the wall. What the hell's that? You know, you're in a restaurant. Why not just put something random? So that's why. And the band for me though was much more of a team effort. That was the first time we actually put something on the wall that had some type of significant or symbolic meaning or metaphor, you know, because the band, everyone in that band could play every instrument, and they edited the process. Every song got ripped apart, and that's what made them so very successful. And it took a long time working with Elliot Landy, the photographer, who's in Woodstock, and very, very long time. It took about a year to get that photo right. So.
Is that like, did you find yourself being able to say, I'm successful now and I can call this guy and be like, yeah?
No. He didn't care he didn't care about it. Elliot Landy is a very successful photographer. He just, he was more concerned about his photo being, making sure we weren't going to sully his reputation.
So I live in Brooklyn, nowhere near any of your restaurants, but I did trek out to Co. And
glad you could get in.
Yes, I got in. and it was definitely a culinary adventure. So right around like probably the 7th or 8th course, I wasn't really sure I was gonna make it to however many there was. I was like 13 or something like that. So what made you kind of go with that many courses and kind of the concept behind that?
So Noodle Bar Transformation. So Noodle Bar was 600 square feet. We did 27 seats, and we would do 300 covers a day. So that's like about a turn and a half on an average day. It just wore out. The only way we had the lease and we moved the new Noodle Bar, the only way we could keep this restaurant or keep it as a restaurant was to do fewer covers. And that number was 12. So it allowed us to do multiple course tastings. So that's why we did, dinners 10 courses and lunch, it was only one seating. So we could do 17 courses, which I think it's a lot, but if you go to a lot of these, I went to recently. I had like a 7.5 course dinner, and it was 47 courses, and we can't do that. But we thought that 17 was about the right number, and 10 was about the right number for dinner, and it also has to do with the timing. Dinner, we have to turn the tables once, so that's the reason why. It was a certain price point, and we can't just do 3 courses. So hopefully you had a good time. Okay.
Hi, I have 2 questions actually. One is, how much cooking do you actually still do? And the second question is not from me. I am not vegetarian. I never wish to be vegetarian, but I do have friends who are. I'm
sorry.
I know.
No,
it's really hard.
No, I'm sorry because
No.
It's a pain in the ass for friends organizing.
So this is the thing, right? We were talking about the Ssam dinner. It was 6 meat eaters, and the title of the email I think was actually Meat Feast. We now have a meat club where we have picked another restaurant to go to eat more meat. But not that I wish to exclude my vegetarian friends, but I was just interested to know what your thoughts on vegetarianism were. I know there are probably vegans and vegetarians like staring dagger eyes at me right now. But also if you had any intention of having something else that was more vegetarian friendly. I know that like even Noodle Bar is not recommended for vegetarians. It actually says that on some of the menus, which I think is kind of cute.
What was the first part of the question you guys?
The first question was how much cooking do you do? And the second question was how much do you hate vegetarians?
Right now, I'm not cooking that much. I don't like working behind the line at the restaurants that are all open. I thought Co would be the last project I work on, but it got a little too intimate, and I don't want to yell at the guests. I've done that before when we first opened up, because I get a little too into it, and for health reasons too, I get a little too into it. My stress level gets a little too high, and for many reasons, I'm spending less time physically cooking, but hopefully that's going to be in a few months. I'm going to be able to channel that energy into a different way. But right now I'm doing the book tour, and I keep my hands in the kitchen, but not as much. In terms of not as much as I'd like. We could spend all day talking about my problems with that. But in terms of vegetarians, I have nothing against them. And the reason why we don't serve vegetarians or have vegetarian-friendly menus is because we're in New York City. There's thousands of restaurants. So you don't go to a sushi, a sudo, or masa and ask for a vegetarian menu. You don't go to Peter Luger's and ask for tempeh. You don't go to, why do we have to cater to everybody? That's what seriously, like, why do we have to cater to everybody? I mean, it's not like we don't love vegetables. I love vegetables. I love cooking with vegetables. But it just sort of became one of those things. Why do we have to create an extra menu? That's sort of how it happened. And I have nothing against it, vegetarians and vegans. I mean, a lot of my friends from college are vegetarians now. And I just think it's ironic that, they're not going to eat something on the menu that's maybe local. I was at a wedding and I got in a big fight with all my friends, with one of them. And it was a local lobster, it was local vegetables, and local everything. But no, all the protein was local, but all the vegetables were from all around the universe. And but he wouldn't eat something that was caught within 100 yards. And he was like, it's all about protecting the environment, being green and all that stuff, and which I'm all for. But I'm like, dude, you're eating something. Your entire plate is carrots from Chile, asparagus from Peru, and I think you're doing more harm by not eating. He's like, well, I don't want to hurt a sentient being, but I was like, well, if you're not supporting your local farmers or your local, just people that are making food locally, I think that makes more sense. So if you're going to be a vegetarian, eat what's within, walking distance or driving distance. Yeah. So I could go, again, that's a whole nother topic, sorry.
Hi, David. I'm a big fan of your food. I've not had a chance to try your co-restaurant because the website appears to always be blocked off with the reservations. I was wondering if maybe there's another secret way to get a reservation, or if there's a coupon code. No.
I figured you guys, you guys could just crack into our computer system. Yeah, I'm surprised that it hasn't happened yet. Really, it's not that complicated. Whoever made it, it's not that complicated. No, there aren't any secrets. Try later in the afternoon and try on Sundays and weekends and holidays. It's 12 seats. We're very lucky that we're still busy and people want to eat there. So, yeah, I tried. It's totally ridiculous process. I was like, I have the patience of a 5-year-old. I was just like, no, I can't even do it. So.
Hi, I was really interested to hear you talk about the craft of making food, working with your hands. And I've never cooked professionally, but the 2 times I've cooked either a lot of food in a row or for a lot of people, it was one time was for a group that was consistent. So we were making the food, but I think what we created was really like the love of the continued experience and the repeat meals with the same group. And in the other instance, we were putting, I think, as much energy into the food, but I didn't feel like we were getting the same thing back because the people underneath, the people tasting or the people evaluating it kept changing. So for you, is it the craft of making the meal, or is it the craft of building a restaurant, or somewhere in between?
It's all of the above, and it's also, tasting, making something in your hands and taking a carrot and transforming a raw carrot into carrot paper. That's a lot of work. And that's something you can see that's one thing about cooking where you can see the process from raw to finished in one day. Or if not one day, you have the pleasure of, say, making duck prosciutto or ham, for instance. I'll never forget when I made my first prosciutto. Did it come out great? No, but it was 9 months. And I was just waiting. And you break down the hog and you do it, and it's that process is wonderful and it's beautiful, and that's sort of what I call the craft. Sorry.
Thanks for coming. How do you? One of the things you were talking about was hunger and success, and I guess wondering how you guys reconcile success and continued pursuit of success and growth of more restaurants, cookbooks, etc., with trying to kind of artificially or actually instill the hunger that is required to take bold risks and do cool stuff. I guess it's not just a lesson for cooking. It could be said of places like Google, how to raise a child,
right?
Any of that stuff. So I'm just kind of interested in your take on, now that you've made it, how do you keep yourself and your folks honest?
By never thinking that we made it.
Right.
Don't believe that she ever made it. I'm weirdly paranoid like that. if you start resting on your laurels, you're screwed. Basically, don't believe the hype. Don't believe anything. You have to be your harshest critic, and you have to be constantly improving. So, it's very hard to do. And telling you right now, I'm having a hard time trying to make sure that is happening. And I think that's, I guess that's something that every company has to struggle with. So I'm figuring that out myself. Thanks.
I just had another question about the reservation system. I actually haven't had any problems. I've been to Code twice already. But yeah. Anyways, I was just curious, what was the intent when you decided to come up with the reservation system, and do you actually think that it's worked out and done what you wanted it to do? And this is something whether you want to do again in the future with another restaurant.
Well, we did it because it's 12 seats, and you hire an employee to answer the phone. That's what, $35 minimum, $40,000 a year. Why? For 12 seats, and then it would just become sort of a club for like friends and it would just be a process. And I get bogged down at least 30 minutes of my day. Hey Dave, can you get me a table? And these are friends that you have to do. And I wanted this place and the cooks and chefs that work there to be free from anything other than just focusing on the food. And if they were free from the BS of trying to get reservations for friends, then that was one big step that I could take off their plate. One big pile of shit they didn't have to deal with. And has it worked out perfectly? No, but it's worked out in the sense that we wanted to create a fair and equal place where anyone could eat. It sucks when chefs come into town or friends come into town and they can't plan. Of course, we want people to eat there, but it's 12 seats, and I wanted it independent because I also didn't want to get bothered with like, hey Dave, can you get me a seat? And I'm like, sorry man, like I can't. It's independent of me. So people don't believe me, but that's just the way it is. And yes, it sort of worked. We've applied it to our Ssam reservations, our fried chicken, and who knows what's going to happen. So it's one of those things that was sort of on a lark, and it just happened. And again, the primary reason was, why the hell do we need one person answering the phone for 12 seats? Can we find an easier way? So that was how it came about.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi there.
Hi.
I also had a question about the reservation system. No, really. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your inspiration. You cook some very unusual dishes, and I was wondering where you get inspired to make those.
Usually in an altered state. No, a lot of the times it's eating at another restaurant, or just a lot of times just messing around with food. That's why I was saying it's hard to create food when you're not physically touching it. I thought I could be, theoretically, or just like messing around with food in my head. But for me, I've learned that I have to be touching with food. I have to be the one making mistakes. So that's one of the reasons why it's been very difficult transition for me to not be handling food and making recipes and stuff like that. I need to work with food. I just can't think about food. I can write about food, I can think about food, and I can do it, but the glue that puts it all together is for me touching the food and working with food. So that's just my process. Everyone has their own unique way. That's mine. I have to take a shotgun approach at food and just see what sticks on the wall. So.
Thank you. Hi. So I actually do have a question about the reservation system. Is it actually true that your parents couldn't even get a reservation?
Well, they had their chance to come to friends and family, and they couldn't make it. And I felt that, and I still feel this way very strongly, that if I show favoritism, then it just undermines the reservation system, and it undermines what we're trying to do to all of our managers and the people that work at our restaurants. That I never want to be in a position where we take from our employees. And I feel that, just because we set this reservation system. I want to keep my word and say like, yeah. So they did have to wait a year. My sister wound up getting them a reservation. Did I feel like a jerk? Yes. But again, it was a lesser of two evils for me. I was like, I would rather have them, do it the right way than to go out and then I'd have to do it for everybody. So that's why. So it is true. So I am a jerk.
Just a question about your recommendations for other restaurants that you love in the city, particularly Cheap Eats.
I love, it's a well-known fact, I love all Grand Sichuan internationals. You have one on 23rd and 9th Avenue, I believe. And Chinatown, Cheap Eats, though. I usually stick to Chinese food. Not that it's cheap, but I don't know. If I had my choice, I'd really like us to have the Mission from San Francisco in New York City somehow. That would be great Cheap Eats.
It's a great Mexican.
Yeah.
Another idea for you.
Yeah. Working on it.
Last week, there was a massive Twitter that went around of your, I guess, documentary on like VBS TV.
Yeah.
It was truly amazing, and I love the cameo of Gary Vaynerchuk at the end of it. Is that part of a bigger documentary that you're doing, or was it just this one little clip?
It was one random thing.
Oh.
Yes, that's one-shot deal, and yes, it basically documents the state of how drunk I am throughout the night. So, yeah.
I hope somebody in Mountain View asked this, but when are you going to open up something in San Francisco?
Probably not. Not that I don't want. I love San Francisco. I mean, it's funny how things become these like lightning rod things that could be now on a blog or something, and like, again, Dave trashes San Francisco again, blah blah blah. It's such bullshit. I wouldn't do it because I think that it's very difficult to operate a business in San Francisco. I think it's wonderful that all restaurants have to provide health insurance for their customers. I mean, for their employees. I think it's great, and I think it's great that it's mandatory. What I don't think is great is that you have to pay minimum wage to servers that are anywhere from $9.50 to $10.50 an hour. They're bringing home, on a 30-hour work week, maybe $60,000, $70,000. I think that's unfair to do that. But there's a lot of bureaucracy in San Francisco that I find to be I couldn't open up a restaurant in San Francisco proper. I think there's just too much red tape, and I would never. That's probably the main reason why. So, and I think they don't really want New York chefs coming to San Francisco. They're very territorial.
I used to live here, so I miss it. I live there now.
Well, I never say never, but right now I don't see any plans, but if you ever see me on Dancing with the Stars, then you'll probably see me in San Francisco, which I hope will never happen.
I think we have time for one more question.
Sure. Talking about opening new restaurants, and obviously the new restaurant coming in Midtown soon, are you afraid that you're going to get to the point where, you just have the Momofuku name attached to something without really being able to get as involved? Is that something that concerns you? Is it more of a collective than just about you? Or, how do you see all that?
It is something that the question is how do I deal with the Momofuku brand as we grow and my involvement with it? And a lot of it is collective. We're making people owners, and I want my involvement to be less and less. And as we grow, I can't be at every restaurant cooking behind every stove. And Marco Pierre White said it best, and that's why he called bullshit on it all. He's like, he would rather quit as a chef and just be a restaurant owner than say he's a chef at 5 restaurants. And that's why in Midtown, I'm not saying I'm the chef there. I'm not Tin Ho's the executive chef there. I'm just his friend helping out. And, you know, Tin should have had a restaurant a few years ago. Now he has his opportunity and he's got a real deal and he's going to be the owner, chef owner there. So that's how we're going to, I think, approach the future as a group. It's not a single effort and it's only going to make our group stronger, I think. So, cool. Thank you very much, guys.